My name is Clara Monroe. I'm 26 years old, and nothing could have prepared me for the truth that came to light after my grandfather's death. I thought grief would be the hardest part, missing his laugh, his gentle hands, his way of making everyone around him feel like the most important person in the world. But I was wrong. His passing didn't just leave an empty seat at the table. It cracked open secrets buried so deep, they'd poisoned our family long before any of us realized. When the call came about the reading of his will, I assumed it would be a formality. Grandpa Oliver was an organized man, a retired judge who left nothing to chance. But that morning, before I even made it to the estate, something happened that made me question everything. I stopped at a small gas station on the outskirts of Boston to fill up before the drive to his countryside home in Vermont. As I was about to replace the nozzle, a disheveled man emerged from behind the convenience store. His clothes were worn, his face shadowed by a beard streaked with gray, but his eyes were startlingly clear. He walked straight toward me, urgency in his steps. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. I froze. Hearing my name from a stranger's lips felt like ice on the back of my neck. "Do I know you?" I asked, wary but polite. He shook his head, glancing around as though the gas station cameras were watching more than just traffic. "You need to listen carefully," he said, lowering his voice. "Don't drive that car. They know you're coming." I blinked, utterly confused. "What are you talking about?" He leaned closer, his breath tinged with cold air and cigarettes. "Oliver tried to warn you. He said you'd be stubborn like him." My heart skipped. "You knew my grandfather?" "I worked for him once," the man said, glancing at the Buick behind me. "He found out things about your family, things they would kill to keep hidden." I stepped back instinctively. "You're mistaken." "Maybe," he said softly. "But when the lies start falling apart today, look in the glove compartment. That's where he left you the key." And before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing behind the corner of the building. I stood frozen for a long moment, staring after him. My first instinct was to laugh it off, just another unwell stranger who had picked the wrong person to bother. But my hands trembled as I started the car, because somehow, in the deepest corner of my gut, I knew he wasn't lying. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by tall pines that blurred into green shadows as I drove north. Normally, the drive to Grandpa's estate brought me peace, the kind of nostalgic calm that reminded me of simpler days. But today, my nerves were razor sharp. Every few minutes, I checked my mirrors. No one was following me, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Halfway through the trip, my mother called. "Clara, where are you?" she demanded, her tone brisk as always. "On my way. I'll be there before 2. "Well, everyone's already arrived," she said. "Your father, your cousins, even Ethan and I are waiting." Her voice softened slightly, though it carried that ever-present undertone of superiority. "Please, darling, try not to be late. It's an important day for all of us." "I'll make it on time," I said. "You're not taking that old car, are you?" I glanced at the steering wheel, my knuckles tightening. "Yes, Grandpa's Buick. Why?" There was a pause. "Oh, no reason. Just drive carefully." Then she hung up. Her voice had sounded off, strained, almost anxious. And the way she'd said that car made something twist in my stomach. I pushed the thought away and focused on the road, but the tension only grew stronger. When I finally turned down the long gravel driveway to the Monroe estate, the house came into view like a memory I wasn't sure I wanted back. The white colonial stood tall and perfect against the early autumn sky, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. To anyone else, it would look picturesque, a place of wealth and stability. To me, it was the stage where every argument, every rivalry, and every betrayal in my family had been quietly performed for years. Margaret, my grandfather's longtime housekeeper, opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her smile thin. "Miss Clara," she said softly, pulling me into a hug that smelled of linen and polish, "it's good to have you home." "Feels strange being here without him," I admitted. She nodded, her gaze flickering toward the hallway. "They're all in the dining room. Best brace yourself, dear. Tensions are high." Of course they were. Inside, the house looked just as I remembered. Grandfather's study still lined with leather-bound books, the ticking of the antique clock echoing faintly through the halls. But the warmth was gone. The dining room was already occupied. My mother, Helen, sat at one end of the long mahogany table, impeccably dressed as always. Beside her was her husband, Ethan, his smile calculated and polite. On the opposite end sat my father, Gregory, with his much younger girlfriend, trying awkwardly to appear dignified. My cousins, Derek and Isla, sat between them, quiet, guarded, and clearly dreading the afternoon as much as I was. My mother's eyes flicked up as I entered. "Finally," she said, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "We've been waiting." "The reading isn't until 2, I replied, setting my bag down. "We thought we'd have a family lunch first," Ethan added with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, "to align expectations." "Align expectations," my father muttered. "Meaning make sure Helen gets what she wants." "Meaning," Ethan countered, "we'd like to avoid chaos." I sank into a chair between Derek and Isla, who both offered faint smiles of solidarity. "This is ridiculous," my mother said, ignoring the tension. "Oliver would have wanted civility." "That's rich coming from you," my father shot back. The argument that followed was quiet but sharp, the kind of verbal fencing my parents had perfected over the years. They didn't raise their voices. They wielded words like knives, and then the double doors opened. "Mr. Harrington," Margaret announced. Our grandfather's attorney stepped into the room, a tall, silver-haired man with a serious expression and a leather briefcase. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, adjusting his glasses, "if you'll follow me to the library, we can begin. Mr. Monroe left very specific instructions that the reading take place precisely at 2 o'clock and in his study." My mother's lips thinned, but she stood, smoothing her dress. "Of course." As we filed into the library, I couldn't help but glance at the old Buick through the window in the distance. The homeless man's warning echoed again in my head. "Look in the glove compartment. He left you the key to everything." I made a mental note. When this circus was over, I'd check. The library was exactly as I remembered it. Floor-to-ceiling books, the faint smell of tobacco, and Grandpa's favorite chair by the fireplace. His glasses still rested on the side table, beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. It was like he'd stepped out of the room just moments ago. Harrington cleared his throat and began, "Before we proceed, I must inform you that Mr. Monroe made significant changes to his will 1 month before his passing." That got everyone's attention. My mother's head snapped toward me. 1 month ago? Wasn't that after your last visit, Clara? "Yes," I said, confused. "But what does that—" "Convenient timing?" my father muttered under his breath. "Enough," Mr. Harrington said sharply. "You'll all have your answers soon. But first, Mr. Monroe left something for you to see." He pressed a button on a small remote, and the flat-screen television flickered to life. And there he was, Grandpa Oliver Monroe sitting in that very same leather chair looking directly at us. "If you're watching this," he began, voice calm and steady, "then I'm gone. Don't waste your tears on me. I've lived long enough to know that death is rarely the end. It's simply the moment when truth stops hiding." He smiled faintly. And truth, my dear family, is long overdue. The air in the room grew heavy as my grandfather's voice echoed from the television. Everyone shifted in their seats, silent but tense, each of them aware that this wasn't going to be a simple farewell message. Grandpa Oliver adjusted his posture on the screen, leaning forward slightly. His expression softened for a moment and then hardened again, as though he were balancing grief with disappointment. "I have spent my life trying to hold this family together," he began. "I've watched you grow, fight, love, and betray each other, sometimes all in the same breath. I turned a blind eye more often than I should have. But old age teaches you something, that silence can be as dangerous as lies." My mother's diamond bracelet clinked faintly as she crossed her arms. My father stared at the floor while Ethan, her husband, leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Helen," Grandpa said suddenly, and my mother froze. "You've always believed that appearances were everything. You once told me that people don't respect honesty, they respect presentation. And maybe in your world that's true. But presentation doesn't build character. It hides decay. You and Ethan have been quietly removing valuable items from this home for months. The Rembrandt sketches, the silver candelabra, the antique compass from my study, all gone. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I'd lost my mind?" A small gasp escaped from Isla's lips. My mother's cheeks flushed red. "That's absurd," she snapped at the screen. "He must have been confused. Ethan put a hand on her arm. "Don't," he whispered. His calm tone couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. Grandpa continued, his voice sharper now. You were my daughter, Helen, my only child, and I loved you enough to forgive your vanity, but I cannot forgive your greed. Every item you took was cataloged on camera. The footage is in safe hands. You won't face charges, but you won't see a cent from me either. My mother gasped audibly this time. He can't, she stammered, her words tangling together. Grandpa turned his gaze to the opposite side of the screen. And Gregory, he said, my father's name slicing through the air like a blade. You've always blamed everyone but yourself. When your marriage fell apart, you pointed at Helen. When your business failed, you pointed at the economy. But I saw the truth in your bank statements. The gambling, the debts, the forged checks in my name. You used my legacy to fund your losses. My father's head snapped up. That's a lie. He shouted at the television, his voice trembling. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But no one defended him. Grandpa's image sighed softly. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Greg. I paid off your debts twice. The third time I realized you didn't need help. You needed consequences. And now, you'll get them. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint crackle of the fireplace. To my grandchildren, Grandpa continued, his tone softening slightly. Derek, Isla, you were the light of this family once. You brought laughter into rooms that had forgotten what joy sounded like. But somewhere along the way, you lost yourselves in your parents' bitterness. I can only hope that what I've done will give you both the freedom to start over, away from all this. Isla reached for Derek's hand under the table, squeezing it tightly. And then, Grandpa's gaze shifted. His eyes softened and his lips curved into a faint smile. And Clara... My chest tightened as he said my name. You have your grandmother's heart and my stubborn streak. You've always seen more than you let on. The cracks, the unspoken words, the quiet wrongs. But you never said a thing, because you wanted peace. I admire that, but peace built on silence is an illusion. Sometimes the truth has to burn before it can heal. My throat ached and I blinked back tears. And I saw the doubt in your eyes, the questions you were too afraid to ask. I left you something, Clara, a key to the truth. It's yours alone to find. When you do, you'll understand why this family had to fall apart before it could be whole again. And then he looked directly into the camera, his voice firm. To my family, this will not be an inheritance of wealth. It will be a reckoning of truth. The screen flickered to black. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mother broke the silence. This is outrageous, she hissed. He was manipulated, probably by you, Clara. You were the last to see him. I stared at her, speechless. What? You were always his favorite, she spat. He probably made you executor. Don't act innocent. That's enough, Ethan said sharply, though his voice wavered. Let's just hear the rest of the will. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat as though trying to restore order. As per Mr. Monroe's instructions, I will now proceed with the legal portion of the reading. He shuffled through the stack of papers, his voice steady as he read aloud. To my daughter, Helen Monroe Winters, and her husband Ethan, I leave $1 each as acknowledgement that they require no further financial assistance from me. My mother let out an audible gasp. $1? He's disinheriting us? To my son-in-law Gregory Monroe, Harrington continued, I leave forgiveness, though not fortune. He will receive nothing. Instead, I have instructed my legal team to settle his outstanding debts with a trust account in my name, under the condition that he never contact this family again. Gregory's face turned red. He's cutting me out completely. But Harrington kept reading. To my grandchildren, Derek and Isla Monroe, I leave a trust fund of $50,000 each, under the condition that they pursue education or work unrelated to their parents' businesses. And finally, he paused, looking directly at me. To my granddaughter, Clara Monroe, I leave the Monroe estate, including the house, its surrounding properties, and all personal effects within. However, she must claim it in person within 7 days. Failure to do so will result in the estate being donated to the Boston Museum of History. My heart stopped. The room erupted in chaos. My mother leapt to her feet, shouting, "This is a manipulation. He was sick." "Clara, you had something to do with this." "Enough!" Mr. Harrington barked, louder than I'd ever heard him. These were Mr. Monroe's final wishes, and they are legally binding. Everyone fell silent. I sat frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Grandpa left me everything? Why? And what did he mean by the key to the truth? I thought of the homeless man at the gas station. Look in the glove compartment. He left you the key. I excused myself quietly from the room, ignoring my mother's glare as I slipped out into the hallway. Outside, the late afternoon sun hung low over the trees. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. I walked to the circular drive, my footsteps crunching on gravel, and stopped by the navy blue Buick. My hands trembled as I opened the door and reached for the glove compartment. Inside was a folded envelope with my name written in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. My breath caught. I tore it open. Inside was a brass key tied to a thin red ribbon, and a short note in his neat cursive. For when you're ready to know everything they've tried to hide, the truth is closer than you think. And beneath it, an address I recognized. The Monroe Estate, basement storage room, south wing. The sun had started to dip behind the trees when I stood before the old basement door at the far end of the south wing. The house was quiet now, though faint murmurs from the dining room still echoed down the hall. My mother was probably still shouting, my father likely sulking, and my cousins whispering about what had just happened. None of them noticed that I'd slipped away. I held the brass key in my hand, its metal warm from my palm. My heartbeat matched the soft ticking of the old grandfather clock nearby. Every instinct told me to wait, to come back with someone else, maybe even call the lawyer. But the part of me that had always trusted my grandfather, the part that believed he never did anything without reason, pushed me forward. The key fit perfectly into the lock. When I turned it, a sharp click echoed, followed by the soft creak of rusted hinges. The door opened into darkness. I flicked the light switch and a single bulb buzzed to life, illuminating the stone staircase that led down into the basement. Dust floated in the air like ghosts. The familiar scent of old wood and varnish filled my nose. It smelled exactly like Grandpa's art studio from when I was a child. Each step groaned beneath my feet as I descended. The deeper I went, the cooler the air became, the faint hum of the house fading into silence. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a large, unfinished room lined with shelves and boxes. It looked ordinary at first glance, the usual clutter of an old estate. But then I saw it, a metal cabinet tucked away in the corner, secured with a combination lock. And taped to the front of it was another note in my grandfather's handwriting. You'll know the combination when you remember the truth. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. When I remember the truth? My eyes scanned the room, searching for clues. There were boxes labeled with years, 1995, 2001, 2014, and folders stacked high on a table. I brushed dust off one box and opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs, candid shots of my family at different stages of life. Birthdays, Christmases, summers by the lake, and then one photograph stopped me cold. It was a picture of me as a little girl standing between my parents and my grandfather. We were all smiling, but something was wrong. The date written on the back read 2002. I was supposed to be 4 years old then, but in the photo, I looked at least 6. That's when I noticed something else. The woman beside my father wasn't my mother. She looked eerily similar, but younger. Her eyes were a different color. I dug deeper, finding more photos. The same woman appeared again and again, always with my father, always at family events, even ones that I distinctly remembered my mother attending. A chill ran through me. What is this? And then I saw it. A hospital bracelet tucked inside the box, yellowed with age. My breath caught when I read the name. Clara Monroe, Infant Ward, June 1996. I was born in December 1996. At least, that's what I'd always been told. I stumbled back, my hand trembling as I pulled another envelope from the same box. Inside was a birth certificate, mine, but the mother's name wasn't Helen Monroe. It was Emily Carter. My mind spun. Emily Carter, the woman in the photos. I pressed a shaking hand to my mouth. My mother wasn't my real mother. The combination. The note said I'd know it when I remembered the truth. I glanced at the certificate again. My birth date, June 6, 1996. My mother had always insisted I was born in December, 6696. It had to be. I hurried to the cabinet, my fingers trembling as I spun the dial. 6, 6, 9, 6. A loud click. The door swung open. Inside were folders, videotapes, and an old cassette recorder. On top of them was another letter, sealed with my grandfather's initials. I tore it open. Clara, if you're reading this, then you've uncovered what I've kept from you for 26 years. You were not born into the life you think you were. Your mother, Emily Carter, was a young artist I met when she came to paint my portrait. She and your father fell in love, but Helen, my daughter, couldn't bear the humiliation. She used her influence and Ethan's money to destroy Emily's reputation. By the time your father realized what had happened, it was too late. Emily vanished. You were told she abandoned you, but she didn't. Helen took you. She forged the records, changed your birth date, and raised you as her own to protect the family name. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My vision blurred. I wanted to tell you sooner, the letter continued. But Helen threatened to cut you off from everyone if I ever interfered. I had to be careful. The truth would have destroyed her, and you. But when I discovered she had begun stealing from this house, I knew her greed would soon expose her anyway. You deserve to know who you are, Clara. There's a tape in this cabinet. Play it. It will explain the rest. My shaking hands reached for the old tape recorder. I pressed play. Static filled the room, followed by a familiar voice. My mother's. I did what I had to do, she said coldly. Emily was going to ruin everything. She didn't deserve Gregory, and she certainly didn't deserve his child. That baby was better off with me. I gave her everything, a name, a future. Oliver never understood. The recording continued, her voice growing harsher. If he ever tells her the truth, I'll make sure the entire estate burns before she sees a penny. The tape clicked off. I sank to my knees, the recorder falling from my hand. Everything I'd believed about my life, my parents, even my identity, it was all a lie. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression pale and tight. I hoped you'd never find that, she said quietly. How long have you been standing there? I whispered. Long enough. She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. I should have destroyed everything after he died. I backed away. You lied to me, my whole life. I saved you, she interrupted. Do you think your real mother could have given you this life? Do you think she would have survived without me? Her voice shook, but not with guilt, with rage. You stole me, I said, my voice trembling. You stole someone's child. Because your father was weak, she shouted, losing control. He would have thrown his life away for her. I fixed it. I fixed all of it. I shook my head. You didn't fix anything. You destroyed it. For a long, breathless moment, we stared at each other, two strangers bound by lies. Then quietly, I said, Grandpa was right. The truth had to burn before it could heal. Her expression faltered. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what you never could, I said, turning toward the stairs. Tell the truth. As I climbed back into the light, the old house felt different, heavier yet clearer, as though the walls themselves could finally exhale. That evening, I called the lawyer. The recording, the documents, the photographs, everything would go to the authorities. My grandfather's name would be cleared, and the world would finally know who I was. The Monroe fortune no longer felt like a blessing. It was a burden, one I intended to rebuild, not hoard. Before I left the estate that night, I stood at the edge of the lake where Grandpa and I used to paint. The water reflected the last traces of sunset, rippling with gold and crimson light. I whispered softly into the breeze, I found the truth, Grandpa. And for the first time in my life, I finally felt free.